Let's talk a little bit about Billy Napier and that hot seat. Um, Florida lost to LSU 20-10 on Saturday night in Baton Rouge. And I think if you just read that highlight, right, that headline, you would think like, all right, Florida hung with the number 3 team in the country on the road at night. That is not a horrific performance. But if you watch the game, you know that it was a horrific performance. It was something completely different. It was almost like neither team actually wanted to win. Florida just made more mistakes, 5 interceptions, which is, a ton, right? And 5 interceptions, uninspired play calling, kind of head scratching at times, I guess, kind of getting away from Jaden Baugh, who, is the best player on Florida's offense at this moment. But Florida's defense played lights out. This is a defense that has only allowed 2 touchdowns in all 3 games this season, but they've lost the last 2 games, which is just such a wild stat to me that their defense can be so stout and they're still losing these games. But how long does Billy Napier have as the head coach at the University of Florida? Will?
If I'm in charge, he has until Sunday morning when they lose to Miami. Because looking at the game against LSU, Florida won the first down battle by 13. They were better on third downs. They had more total yards, less penalty yards, and had more time of possession. This team just cannot stop making dumb mistakes that loses them games. And it's been happening really for 4 years. I mean, because offensively, like I said, they only had 10 points, 6 yards per pass, 3 yards per rush. If you had told that Florida team going into that game, your defense is going to be responsible for only 10 points that LSU earns at home in Death Valley, you take that 100 times out of 100 and you're thinking, we're going to win this game by 3 scores. Then they lost by 10. Like, there's just something fundamentally wrong with this team where they just can't get over the hump. Like you said, only 10 carries for Jaden Ball. They threw it to him 7 times. You're kind of fixing something that isn't broken because getting him involved in the air is fine, but just hand the ball off to him. Nobody can tackle him. Hayden Hansen caught 7 more passes. Just too much for Hayden Hansen. But man, yeah, there's just something fundamentally wrong with this Florida team. And I think, especially if they lose this game to Miami in not great fashion, which I think there's a good chance that happens because Miami looks legit. Are they really going to have this cloud sitting over the program for 14 days and then trot him out at home against Texas? Because it's also clear that there are culture issues because we saw at the alma mater, there was like one person there. It seems like DJ Lagway, healthy or not, his fault or not, he's just regressing under a guy who's supposed to be an offensive head coach. The offense is his responsibility. It couldn't be much worse. And like you said, only 2 touchdowns allowed this year. They're 1-2. They're wasting a playoff caliber defense on an offense that just cannot stop shooting themselves in the foot.
I will tell you, I always use singing the alma mater as kind of my bellwether for when a coach's time is up. I can pinpoint watching only a handful sing it for Muschamp, for McElwain, for Mullen, and now obviously we saw that on Saturday. I will tell you, when I was in Gainesville and we lost a week ago, that whole team stood at the band and sang. And so this is a change. This isn't like, somebody's going to come out and say, oh no, he just doesn't put emphasis on it. Like it's a bellwether thing for me. But TJ, if you are Scott Strickland, when are you pulling the plug on the Billy Napier experiment?
Well, I might even turn that back to you a little bit and ask your thoughts. Like, is Scott relatively safe now with the extension and with Todd Golden and the basketball team winning the national championship? Like, is he able to make the fire? Because like that was our big concern last year when we talked about this a ton with Florida's bad start. Was, well, Scott ain't going to do nothing because as soon as do you shoot your life raft, like while you're drowning. And so that would be my big question is if Scott is relatively safe and gets to essentially make another hire at the end of this year, and then his tenure is now tied to this next coach instead of Napier, then yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to how much booster pressure there is. I don't think it benefits Florida to really let him go. They're not going to they're not going to fire him and somehow sometimes you see like a team kind of give an inspired effort after a coach is gone. But usually that's like when he's lost the locker room or when they hate their coach. I think these guys love Billy Napier for all of his faults. I still think this team, are they great offensively? No, they're not. Are they a mess, Discipline wise, absolutely they are. But man, they're still playing. Like they're trying hard. Like I've not seen any kind of lack of effort. Now it's only been 3 games, so if Miami beats them by 40 again like last year, and you see guys quit, then maybe my thoughts on this change some. But I mean, Florida's probably going to get to like 4 or 5 wins if I had to guess it right now. If you fire him now and guys can jump in the portal the next day, that could turn into like 2 or 3, like, and so is it maybe worth it to not do that? Like, is it worth it to maybe say like, okay, maybe we win one of these next 4, maybe we beat Texas because they stink or something like that. Maybe we beat Mississippi State and Kentucky. Maybe we upset Ole Miss or Tennessee or Florida State or something like that later in the year. And we get to like 5 or 6 wins to just not be the national embarrassment of like 2. I don't know. To me, it's like the season's over anyway. Does it really matter when you do it? And with this whole portal rule in effect, now I wouldn't do it. I mean, if you lose by 40 to Miami this weekend, which that's not my prediction. I don't think they lose by that much, but if you just get embarrassed, maybe you just have to rip the Band-Aid off. But man, Florida's got too much talent on their roster to let that portal open up in September, right? Like I think you at least got to wait till the Georgia game or something like that, because I'm not saying their whole team would just jump in the portal or anything like that, but it would scare me as an AD. It would scare me enough to where I'd be like, I'll wait a few weeks.
So I think there's a lot to unpack in that. And Scott Strickland did just get a contract extension. It extends him to 2030. I think that was done for a couple of reasons. I think it was done mostly because that's when the renovation of Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is supposed to be done. And it kind of ensures that the person that started the project is there for the duration of the project. If you'd asked me, I would have liked to get rid of him before the start of the project so that he did not have a say in the outcome of a generational move for a stadium. I don't think mercenaries should get a vote in things that affect the next 100 years, but I digress. That is a different topic. I do think that he will feel safe enough to make a move. I think that was 1B of the extension, so that he did not feel as tied. Because last year, if he fired Napier, it was a condemnation of his tenure as athletic director. And remember, it was before Florida won this latest basketball national championship, which I think is what he's going to hang his hat on now. But this was his legacy. So if he fired him, I do think he was going down with the ship. I think that's a little different now. And, UF now has an interim president again, but they don't have a real president, and we don't know how long that will take. And so there's a great chance an interim would punt on doing something like replacing an athletic director, but kind of be okay with the concept of replacing a head coach. But I think there's a couple issues with letting him go now. The first one is, over the summer, when we talked about what Florida's record would or could be, there was a few games that we circled as games that were more than toss-up games, probable losses. And I would say Miami and Texas are 2 of those games. So if you weren't going to fire him after he lost to USF, which they didn't clearly, if they let him back in the locker room after that loss, I don't really know that you fire him after he loses to a team that you thought he was going to lose to, even if he made the playoffs, over the summer, and that being Miami and Texas. So I kind of think you give him through those 2 games. And then if Florida loses to USF, Miami, Texas, they obviously already lost to LSU, and A&M in a row, I think that's where you have to make the move, is after that A&M game, because I can't see a scenario where you still have the locker room if you started 1-5 and your only win being against a glorified high school program. You are clearly not trending in the right direction. I've been told 8 wins is what he needs to save his job. I think the moment that 8 wins is off the table, and we can say it's more than likely off the table at this moment, but when it is actually factually off the table, I think that that's when you consider a move. But you do have to think about the transfer portal being open. And right now, the rule stands that the second your coach is fired, you've got 30 days that you can hop in. So if UF can postpone this a few weeks and maybe put some wheels in motion behind the scenes as to who might be the next head coach, and that's tricky because you more than likely want somebody coaching elsewhere, and they're not making the jump until that team is done for the season. But if you can line something up so that the wheels will move incredibly fast once the season ends, that will help you retain as much of this roster as you possibly can. But you're looking at a balancing act between just getting so toxic in there after a certain point, or okay, they're not winning, but they still love each other and they're still fighting. So we're going to let this play out for a little bit. And wherever that tipping point is, that's where the firing needs to happen, I think.
Yeah, and you talked about this. Shout out the other channel, A Peek Inside Gators Football. But everybody that you brought on says this, and it becomes cliche. But what we also should think about is everybody that you asked, hey, what do we need to do this year for Napier to keep his job? Or they always say, well, it's less about a number and it's more about how they look. And admittedly, the defense looks great, but the team in general looks like crap, right? Like if they had gone out and say USF had like upset Miami and Florida like played well, there wasn't the spitting penalty and there wasn't the stuff, but USF was just like, shoot, they're a top 5 team. They're beating everybody, but then you'd say, okay, you still shouldn't lose to that team in the Swamp considering the talent, but maybe the talent was wrong, right? Maybe. And then if LSU just looked incredible right now and you played LSU to a 31-28 game where Lagway shined and man, Death Valley was just too much at night, that'd be a lot different story than going out and throwing 5 picks or blowing against a USF team that your rival the very next week beat their brains out, right? So I think that's important too. If they go down to Miami and let's say Lagway plays well and has 3 touchdowns and 1 pick, just plays relatively well and you just lose a tough road game to a rival, 31-28 or something like that. That's much different than, well, right now they're a 10-point underdog and we're all kind of worried like, dude, this thing could get ugly. And then you come home against an Arch Manning that hasn't been able to figure it out yet and he lights you up or just whatever, right? Like I think the way those losses look, if you lose a couple more games here in the next stretch and you look like you're starting to trend the right way, I mean, the losses still pile up and they still matter. And again, if you don't get to 8, it probably doesn't matter anyway. But I do think what they look like, if they go, like Will said, if they go lose by this game by a million this weekend, shoot, he might be out on Sunday. We might be doing an emergency show. But I think what they look like matters too. They go down there and lose by 3, keep it pretty respectable. Miami's a top 5 team, right? Like, so there's not a lot of shame in losing to a top 5 team on the road when you're unranked. I mean, that's what 90% of teams do. But you can't go down there and lose by 20. You can't get embarrassed like you did last year on your home field. And so what it looks like will matter too. Again, Texas is not a great team right now, despite their high ranking. You can't lose to them by 20 in the Swamp, right? Either of those results, it'll happen faster than anybody wants it to. Well, maybe not the UF fans, but anybody inside the building or whatever.
Well, do you think that some of the information given to the media this summer by this coaching staff is contributing at all to fans' reactions to what we've seen? Like I'm thinking about, so DJ Lagway didn't play essentially all spring or summer for all intents and purposes. He went through mental reps and that's about it. But we were also told things like he's been phenomenal. This is much ado about nothing. Everybody is, making a bigger deal about it than it is. You should see this kid's work ethic. Like, I can't wait for you to see what we see. And then, in the press conference after the loss to LSU, Napier said something like, well, we need to keep in mind that this is only week 4 of him coming back to practice. But that was not the vibe that they were sending out all summer long. Was there a way for them to have relayed that differently over the summer that would make us feel differently in this moment?
I mean, yeah, don't tell fans that is going to be good, right? Unless they had full reason to believe, which maybe they did. But I mean, when you tell your fans things that will obviously amp up their expectations over the summer, and then you don't live up to them, you do have to deal with those consequences. And I think like last year with Florida State, like there was so much buzz around that team being awesome, and then they came out and kind of laid an egg. That's sort of the same thing that we're seeing with Florida this year. So, yeah, I mean, when coaches come out and they're telling you all summer, like, get ready, buy all these tickets, come see our team play. And then you buy the tickets and you lose to USF at home and you throw 5 picks on the road at LSU. Like, that's going to get everybody upset. It's going to make everybody angry. And so, yeah, that's now where we're at right now. We're both the fans are ready for an administration change. The locker room is getting lost. Everything has kind of had a domino effect to get to where we are right now with this Florida team, which is, I don't need to say it, but I mean, they're in a really, really bad spot.
You both have been to practices. I've been to practices. You know ball. I refuse to believe that what we see on Saturday isn't what they're seeing in practice. You play how you practice is not just a cliche. That's a real thing. And so is this coaching staff inept? Do they not know what it is that they're looking at in practice? Or are practices so easy that what they're doing there is going well, but it's just absolutely nothing like what is a real game experience?
I mean, DJ's not practicing. So that, I mean, I'm sure he is now, but like maybe but some guys are, yeah. So through the summer, I mean, he wasn't practicing. So I'm sure they just kind of chalked it up to like, oh, well, it's a true freshman out there or it's Harrison Bailey out there or whatever. Like it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, I mean, I think that is part of the issue is that, yeah, he wasn't practicing. And then some guys are just gamers, right? Like I will say that, like I've heard from multiple, I never saw it in person. I've heard Winston had like the worst practices ever. Like he was terrible in practice. And so like, yeah, from people that like were there, like people on staff, like, no, he sucked in practice. But then somehow when the lights came on, he was just great. And I don't even think that's that uncommon because like you're trying new things, you're trying to put things on film that you can correct. And Allie, I know you
But as
know things
a
about that.
team,
But like I
maybe
don't
not
know.
an individual person, but as a team, like let's say we watch
The defense is probably
Ask play
practicing
after
well.
Ask Nine play on Florida's offense on a regular basis. Like I'm finding a hard time to believing that these plays ever worked in practice, and then like you put something in a game that you weren't able to successfully run in practice is I don't know.
I'm sure the defense looks good out there. And maybe that's what they're chalking it up to is the fact that, yeah, our defense is elite. And so maybe the offense doesn't have as much success. But I also think there's the aspect of like you get familiar with guys in practice and you know their tendencies. And that probably like, again, not to relate everything back to FSU, but like Florida State's practices weren't bad. Now it was a bad team on a bad offense on a bad defense. And so I'm sure they did well last year in practice. But like Florida State didn't see it coming last year either. Like they thought they were practicing well. They thought, and when you put a bad offense against a bad defense, which is not really Florida's situation, but when you put that up against each other, yeah, it can look good, right? Like go watch a Virginia Tech, Virginia game, and it's like, yeah, it's a bad team versus a bad team. Like, of course, it looks good. They scored 30 something points, each. But I think that's kind of that would be my guess. Is yeah, there are probably tendencies, there's mistakes, but maybe it's a pressure thing. Maybe it's just like, man, when the lights are on and they're the brightest, like that's when these guys are just like they don't have and I do think Florida's got a lot of mental mental, not deficiency, but like, what's the word? No mental toughness. So yeah, maybe in practice, they don't see it as much. And I'm sure there is an aspect. I had Snell on last night, practice like you play and stuff like that. But when that pressure is different, like they just, for whatever reason, have no mental toughness and there's not a lot of pressure in practice. Right. And so I think that could be part of it, but we're grasping at straws here trying to figure out what the hell is wrong with this team.
Eric Wilbur says it's because practice isn't competitive.
I mean, I do think with the familiarity of like are you really like, is Napier really having them go 150% in practice?
And is there a winner and a loser in every single thing that you're doing? Because if there is,
right,
you automatically are giving more of yourself because you do want to win. That's how all of these guys are wired. They're all competitors. But is it just, hey, 8 suicides, or is it 8 suicides and the top third, are done with practice and the bottom 2/3 of you are out here for another hour? Yeah. You're going to get some different level of effort from your players. It's the same exact drill, right? But it's a different way of motivating them. And I don't know.
We need Allie Peak out at practice is what we need.
I mean, I have volunteered to coach special teams over the years. I have volunteered to count heads so we send the right number of guys out. No one is taking me up on these things, but guys, I am available